Hey guys, this is God of Politics. I'm welcome back to a brand new video, but before we get started with this video, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Also follow me on Twitter, that is linked down in the description and on my channel page, and join the Discord as well, that is linked down in the description. But today's video, I'm going to be talking about the importance of voter turnout in the 2020 presidential election. Now, I have a couple articles here. Some of them are quite old articles, but I still feel that they're still relevant to today. Now, this first article here is from US News, which talks about the preparation for a voter surge in 2020. Now, in 2016, there actually was quite high turnout, and that's pretty astonishing considering the fact that it was two historically unpopular candidates. You see here Donald Trump had very low approval ratings. Hillary Clinton also had very low approval ratings. Not quite as low as Donald Trump, but still quite low. They were two historically unpopular candidates, and really there was a lot of drive to get out the vote against another candidate rather than for the candidate they voted for. If you see, a lot of the votes that went to Donald Trump were votes against Hillary Clinton, and less so for Hillary Clinton. There were votes against Donald Trump. They were more votes for her. And you're seeing a very similar thing this time too. You're seeing that with Joe Biden here, much of his vote and much of his appeal is based on the fact that he is not Trump and that he can beat Trump, and that there's enough support behind him and enough hatred for Trump that he'll be able to win. That is the idea that the Democrats have. That is the idea that they're going to have to use if they want to beat Donald Trump, because it's how Donald Trump won a vote against Hillary, because Hillary Clinton was really unpopular, and while Donald Trump was even more unpopular, people still turned out to vote for him just because they hated the prospect of having a Hillary Clinton presidency. Now, getting to this article here, it talks about how this article was created September 20th, 2019, but it does talk about the importance of a voter turnout. If you look at the 2018 election, we see it says here it was the highest turnout for a midterm election since 1914. That is pretty historic if you look at it, because if you compare it to 2014 or 2010, for example, those are Republican wave years. Really, it was lower turnout, much lower turnout on both sides. It was just less low on the Republican side. 2018 had higher turnout on both sides. People were more, there was more incentive for them to vote than there ever had been before in terms of midterms, and then that ended up helping the Democrats. We'll talk a little bit later about whether it does help Democrats overall. But in 2018, it did help Democrats having higher turnout amongst the Democratic Party and the Republican Party in terms of midterm results. Now, there are many studies and many models that are predicting that there will be, it says here, this says next year he predicts 65 to 66% of eligible voters will turn out, which is the highest since 1908. If you look at 1908, that was a very high turnout election. It's when presidential candidates really went out and started campaigning. Before that, they hadn't really done that, but this is when they went out and started to campaign. We haven't really seen the same kind of turnout since then. The turnout could be higher than them, which would really be astonishing as well. And there's a lot of reasons that people hadn't turned out before. Often people felt disenfranchised by the establishment. There were a lot of rural voters. That's the thing the Republican Party is going to target. The Republican Party, if they want to win a turnout election, they have to target rural voters who feel disenfranchised by the political system and feel that nobody's going to meet their needs. That is what Donald Trump tapped into in 2016, and it's what he's going to have to do in 2020 as well. For the Democrats, they're going to have to turn out African American voters, they're going to have to turn out Latino voters, and they're going to have to turn out really young people as well. And that's something that Joe Biden's going to struggle with, having the enthusiasm gap that he has. And that's something that's quite important if you actually look at it. But it says here, obviously, it points out, but the last presidential election was decided by a relatively paltry 79,646 votes in three states. Those three states are Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. They barely went to Donald Trump, and only a couple more turnouts for Hillary Clinton, and she would have won. Um, and so again, it points out here that the key to Trump's win in 2016, was the mostly rural and post-industrial areas, that Midwestern area, those legacy Democrats that went to the Republican Party. That's who Trump turned out. Democrats are going to have to hope that eventually those voters are going to go away, and eventually they're going to have to rely more on younger voters that'll eventually turn out and hopefully for their party stay more Democratic. That's what they're going to have to hope for. And it does look good. I've talked a lot about these Latino states, these states like Texas, Arizona, Georgia, these states that are really changing because the suburban vote and Latino vote. That's going to hurt the Republican Party if Democrats are able to turn out more of those voters. Because if you look at certain demographics, Hispanics and Latinos really do not turn out at the rates that they really, should compared to when any other races and ethnicities do, and especially with younger voters too. Younger voters really do not turn out as well. Um, it says here, U.S. less than 56% of the voting age Americans turned out to vote in 2016, putting the nation 26th among 35 industrialized democracies, a 2018 Pew Research study reported. So a lot of countries actually what they have is they have mandatory voting. America does not have that. Election day is not a holiday either. There are often many restrictions to get people to vote. And is that a problem? Yes, it is. I'll make videos about this before about how voter fraud, really isn't an issue, but that's not an issue that I'm going to make now. It talks about states purging the voter rolls, getting people off the voter registrations, and overall just talking about how this election is going to line up. I mean, this was made before Joe Biden was going to be, but this election is going to line up to be very important for both parties, and is therefore going to turn out more voters. And this article talks about how 2020 is a turnout election, and how turnout is going to make the difference. Because there's always been this idea for the Democratic Party that they need to persuade voters, that they need to bring voters onto their side, they need to bring independents, right-leaning independents, some Republicans, moderate Democrats, they need those voters on their side. In fact, this really is not true if you look at the data. In the 2016 general election, as it points out here, 3.6% of the electorate moved from voting for Barack Obama in 2012 to voting for Trump in 2016, and 1.9% of the electorate moved from voting for Romney in 2012 to Clinton in 2016. That's a total of 5.5% of the electorate who are actually persuaded to change their behavior in 2016. And note that these changes of persuadable voters, Democrats only lost a net of 1.7 of the electorate to Trump because they were persuaded to switch parties. Now, what this points out is that really there's not many voters that are actually going to be persuaded to vote either way. There's going to be other factors as to why they're going to vote a certain way, not all the millions of dollars in effort that Democrats put into these swing districts to persuade voters. What they're really going to have to do is they're really going to have to try and turn out voters, because if Democrats can turn out black voters, they can turn out Latino voters, and if they can turn out younger voters, especially if they can bring up those three demographics, that's going to very heavily benefit them in terms of states like Arizona, states like Georgia, states like Texas, and the Rust Belt too, with African American populations, with the younger people, because that's going to help them. We'll talk about what overall voter turnout, who that helps in general, but we're going to talk about this for a bit more. Um, it just keeps pointing out here that 43% of eligible voters didn't vote. And it says of the 232 million eligible voters, only about 132 million people actually cast a ballot. That means that a lot of people just do not feel the incentive to vote. Now, who are these voters? Can you turn them out? Who are these voters? What party are they in? What age are they? What race are they? That's going to be important for both parties to find out, and that's going to be crucial if they want to win, because if they can turn out voters, if they can incentivize them to vote for their side, persuade voters who may not have even voted before, it's a lot easier to do that than persuade voters who voted for another side just the election prior. And it says in Hispanic turnout was 27% in 2014 and 40% in 2018. Asian turnout was 27% in 2014 and 41% in 2018. These are midterms, but having 27% of people turn out, that really shows you what the results are going to be, because Asians and Latinos are very heavily Democratic. And if you can't turn out those voters, then you're going to lose, just like they did in 2014. Now, to kind of wrap this video up, we'll talk about who is this going to benefit. So we've just talked about how that higher turnout is expected, higher turnout is important, but who does this benefit? Is this going to help the Democratic Party? Is this going to help the Republican Party? Most people are saying, sure, it'll help the Democratic Party because there's more black people voting, more Latino people voting, more young people voting. And also with the expansion of mail-in ballots, people are saying that that's going to help the Democratic Party as well. But really, does that help the Democratic Party? There's this good New York Times article here, which is quite old. Again, these are articles from the summer of 2019, some a bit later from that. But this shows that higher turnout might actually not help Democrats as much as it seems. So if we're looking at the approval rating by turnout, if you do increase turnout, eventually it is going to hurt the Republicans. It hurts the most in the Sun Belt. If you have, for example, 100% turnout, the Trump's approval in the Sun Belt goes down to around 47%, and in the Rust Belt it's around 47%. But if you're looking at around, say, 60% turnout, which is similar to what it is now, that is kind of the golden Goldilocks zone for the Republicans, because you're having a increased approval rating in the Rust Belt, the highest it is, and then you're having pretty much close to 50% in the Sun Belt. The Sun Belt is an area that is changing, become more democratic, and you can see here the influence of Latinos is very telling in this area, because Latinos do not turn out at very high rates, and as you increase the turnout, his approval is going to go down because Latinos are a more democratic voter bloc. But if we're looking at, for example, the U.S. here, it's going to continue to go down as the turnout goes up higher. But if you're approaching 50 to 60%, it actually does help the Republicans here. And that's kind of the Goldilocks zone that Trump got in 2016. But if you're reaching the 65% threshold, which is what some people are thinking, that's when you see the Trump's approval in the Sun Belt starts to go down, and the Rust Belt approval starts to stagnate, and the U.S. approval starts to go down just a little bit. So if you're seeing higher turnout in terms of higher than what we've ever seen in over 100 years, in terms of 66%, that will hurt the president in terms of the areas like the Sun Belt. Maybe not as much in the Rust Belt, but it will hurt in the Sun Belt. And you're thinking of a lot of voters. If you're looking at 2018, you see there's a lot of Republican voters that did not vote in 2018. That's true. That's true. But there were also, a lot of people that didn't vote in 2018. If we're looking at 2018 turnout amongst registered voters, there was still the lowest amount of turnout amongst 18 and 29-year-olds. There was still lower turnout amongst, there was a lot of higher turnout amongst college graduates, but still there was lower turnout amongst Hispanics. And while it was 75% higher than it ever has been in quite a while, white people were still higher. And so if you can kind of balance that out, that will help the Democratic Party. And if you're looking at the vote history here, you're seeing that as people get older, they are more likely to support Donald Trump in the Rust Belt here. The Sun Belt stays a bit more stagnant, but again, the Goldilocks zone is around that 50-year threshold. That's, just 55% approval rating. If you're getting to younger voters, the approval is younger. If you're getting to older voters, the approval is quite high as well. And so again, just to wrap up this video here, we can point out that turnout is probably going to be quite high because the candidates are a bit more popular, and this is a very high stakes election, and it's going to be a turnout election. Whoever can turn out the most voters is going to win this election in all likelihood. And who will that benefit? Well, it's probably going to fit the Democratic Party if turnout is high enough. If it's high but not too high, it could help Donald Trump and the Republican Party. But if you're seeing historic levels, like some people are saying 66% turnout, that will help the Democratic Party, especially in areas like the Sun Belt, where there's a higher influence of Latinos and those kinds of demographics. So thank you all for watching this video. Thought this would just be an interesting video to talk about the importance of something that not a lot of people talk about, to be honest. We always have this notion that we have to convince voters, but really it's just about turning out the voters. So thank you all for watching this video. Please like and subscribe as always. Follow me on Twitter, link down in the description and on my channel page, and join the Discord linked down in the description. So thank you all for watching, guys, and I will see you guys later.